everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 20 of Monster, and I couldn't wait. No, I'm sorry. I watched episode 19 a few days ago, and I was like, oh, I could wait to get some more comments and see some things, and I was like, because last episode 19, was crazy. It was crazy. There, we met Rudy, our character of the week, who came in, had a grudge against Tenma. Turns out the grudge was pretty unfounded and was not reciprocated. It was very much one-sided. And we got to learn a little bit more about Johan, who's terrifying. and has literally been manipulating serial killers from the shadows and delving deep into their psyche to control them into killing other people. So that's a fun time. That's a fun time. And honestly, it kind of relates more. I didn't talk about this in the reaction or the discussion, but Johan manipulating Jurgens to kill Mrs. Kampf is kind of like, it's not to the extreme, but it's sort of like him convincing Nina to shoot him in the head for whatever reason. Is it fate? Did he know that he would meet Tenma if she shot him in the head? Did he know? Can he see the future? We don't know. It's fascinating. And now we have the OP, the Edie changing ever so slightly. And it's just getting a little bit creepier and creepier, right? I feel like in the last episode, the creep factor was palpable. There's a film of tension and a film of dread. And I actually talked to Killer Queen about this in the YouTube comments because I was like, I'm easily scared. And by easily scared, I mean like jump scares. Those deal me in. I'm like, and creepy stuff. I like the macabre. I like creepy stuff. It's just, it's so unsettling that you're just kind of like, And some imagery will get me where I'm like, nope. And so they were saying, well, you probably wouldn't want to watch any horror anime, would you? And I'm like, you know what? I try to keep an open mind. I feel like some horror-esque anime would be really stylistically and visually appealing. It would have a good aesthetic. So I could probably watch it at least for that, but it would probably scare the shit out of me. So if that's your goal, if you just want to see me like crap my pants, then sure, recommend all the horror anime, but I don't know. I'm very open-minded when it comes to watching things at least once to get an idea about that genre. So I don't know where to go with that. But yeah, this series is just the right level of tense and creepy. And it's just got this atmosphere to it that's just unsettling. That's the best way to describe it. It's a very unsettling vibe. And you just don't ever feel comfortable, right? You're intrigued and entranced, but you're just never feeling like you're safe. Right, so that was, I feel like episode 18 was probably the last time in the entire series that we felt, that sense of, oh, everything's gonna be okay because Tenma wasn't there, right? So yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know what's gonna happen to Rudy. Hopefully he's okay, but he's gave Tenma a ticket to get on the bus and get out of there. I'm hoping Tenma goes and gets Dieter because I just can't see Tenma leaving Dieter, and Dieter's made a promise to Schumann that he's gonna watch Tenma and make sure he keeps on the straight and narrow. So we'll see, right? But I poured myself a glass of juice and figured, why not? Tonight, I was going to watch another show tonight. I sat down, I pulled it up, and then I was just like, I just don't feel it. And sometimes I'm like that. Like I have a schedule in my planner over here of which shows I think I'm going to watch each week. There's a couple that are scheduled throughout the week that I need to watch to get the reactions ready for Patreon. But then the rest of the week I just kind of plan out. I'm like, oh, I think I'll watch it that day. And then when I sit down, sometimes I just don't feel like it. I'm not in the mood. And tonight, for whatever reason, I was like, I'm in the mood to watch the next episode of Monster. And here we are. So what can we do, right? But I'm really excited, y'all. I hope y'all are too, but let's not waste any more time. We are going to start episode 20 of Monster, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this. This is a very straightforward seeming episode, but it does tap on a lot of little things with the theme that I think are going to connect from the last episode to this episode and into the future, right? So I feel like it's a nice bridge episode. I didn't bring Whiteboard Kun out because I don't think Whiteboard Kun is necessary for this episode. I'm going to probably instantly regret that decision. But man, if like, wow, there's no tension. I was like, I feel actually safe. Like, what a whimsical, fun episode after that doom and gloom and despairingly horrific one last week. And then as we started to like go to the town and like they weren't going the right direction and they went to the police station and they went away, I was like, I started formulating all of these theories in my head of where the episode was going, and I started to get as nervous as Tenma. I started to be like, should I trust? And that kind of, I noticed the lyrics to the ED at the end of the last episode when I was editing, and I was like, ooh. And so the idea of you can only do so much if you place your trust in me. For the love of life, there's a trade-off. We could lose it all, but we'll go down fighting. And there's lots of meanings you can get from those lyrics. A lot of meaning. But the idea of trust and trusting someone and believing in someone, that whole thing of trust, you can either use it in like a sinister connotation almost, or you can use it in a very wholesome connotation. And what I mean by that is you have the idea of this family, the Joneses, as they're called, the Joneses that speak English. The idea that I thought they were from the States, but I'm like, they could very well have been from England. They didn't have to be from the United States. I'm like, no, they could have just been from they weren't from Germany, but they could have just been from England or whatever. But the idea that Tenma has to place his trust in them when they're at that police station. He can either run or he can trust them that they're not going to turn him in, and it's just coincidence that they're there, that there's another reason he doesn't know yet, and trust that they're good people. And then the trust was constantly being put to the test in this episode, right? There was a lot of talk of trust. And I feel like there's a sinister connotation in the ED about, if you are game enough, you can put your trust in me. There's a sinister connotation with the ED because as that's being said, there's a monster literally shoving itself inside like it's taking him over. That part's a little bit malicious, and it's like, I don't know, right? And oftentimes you see like villains in stories. I think of Disney films where like, trust in me. I think of Sir Ka from Jungle Book where he's like, trust in me, and it's very sinister. So there's that. But in this episode, the idea of trust was rather wholesome and was constantly being put to the test in different scenarios, testing whether or not we can truly understand and trust one another that they're going to do something good and not bad, which was kind of the back and forth in this. And so, we go back to talking in the episode about Rudy, and Rudy was basically, saying like, you're not going to kill Johan, are you? And Tim, doesn't answer the question, but off he goes. I was really wondering if we weren't going to get a title card, throughout most of the first part of this episode, because we just have the Joneses traveling. It's a nice little aerial shot. This episode felt very cinematic. It felt very much like a movie in that you had the big overarching landscape shots when they're leaving the town and driving in the car. The musical score in this episode was gorgeous. There was like so many orchestral pieces. At times it sounded like a whimsical Ghibli film, and other times it had like this big like tense string orchestra as they're like going to the castle. It was like really cool. Also, this series has ruined castles for me. Every time I see a castle now, I'm going to be like, is Johan going to pop out and try to kill you there? Like, I don't think I can go to a castle in Europe without thinking that Johan's going to pop out. I don't know if it's possible or not. Because so far, every castle we've been to has had a bad thing happen to it. And this has been the first where it's been decent. And I'm like, okay, good. Glad we cleared that up. But there's a lot of visual context clues. And this episode really begs you to look and listen whether you understand or not. It is very much a show don't tell episode where it really, you have to piece together the pieces and it all doesn't quite come together till the very end and you're like, okay. And so this family, this couple, their whole thing is they came to see their son who's locked up in prison for killing someone, but they're not used to being in Germany. And so they're not used to being in Germany. They don't know how to read the maps. She's older, so she can't quite see things. It's interesting, and there's subtle little clues. When we first heard about Robert on there, I thought he was dead. I thought maybe he had been a soldier and he had died, or he had been in the police here and had died, or he had just died as a kid. There's lots of little context clues that make you think certain things throughout the episode until it all comes together in the end. Like, they just have you guess. This episode had you guessing the entire way. It was literally a red herring. This episode was a giant red herring. And I'm like, mangaka, my heart can't do that. You can't do that, sir. You're just going to freak me out this entire episode. Because I was honestly waiting for the worst to happen. Like, I'll tell y'all as we go through this episode, but every corner I was expecting someone to kill this poor couple. And I was like, no, we've just had so much death and destruction, right? And the man says, I got the map with the rental car. So yeah, there's little things about the two Joneses that we know throughout the episode. Like, we find little context clues about the dad to show that he was a police officer. He picks up on things. He looks at clues. He can do little observations. And when he first tells Timma he's a police officer, I was a little concerned because Timma immediately kind of has like a little bit of a nervous tick. And I was like, if he's a police officer and you're nervous, he's going to think something's suspicious, right? But he does pick up on it, but he doesn't say anything, right? He trusts Tinma in the moment, right? And Dieter, he believes him too. And then the woman, she has a very like motherly presence, and her giving Dieter the cookie and stuff. When she sees the kids playing on the, like, crossing the road and playing, she's like, oh, that's so nostalgic. When you're a kid, you can do nothing wrong. Or when you're a kid, everything's good. I was like, well, I would agree with you, except we just saw Dieter has had a really bad childhood, so I don't know if I can agree with that. But what she's saying is that her son, she thought was good as a kid and had a good life, and now he's ended up like this. So she's questioning her own mothering and her own parenting leading up to this point as well. So once you see the episode in full, it's like all these little moments from the prior in the episode start to add up, and you're like, oh, that's what that was meaning. Okay, all right. That all makes sense now. Because, yeah, they're on their way to see their son after all these years. And so he's like, he doesn't know when she got the map because he says he was in the men's room. And then she says she can't read the fine print. And he's like, well, you left your reading glasses at the airport. And so he's like, they're very tense, right? Like, she's putting on a smile, trying to act calm, trying to make the best of this situation, right? Because it's not a good situation to be in. And he's very tense because you can tell that he's questioning like his parenting, and this is my kid. Is he a bad person or a good person, right? And then we see the two hitchhikers. Man, the 90s were a different time. I'm just going to say, and maybe in Europe, people still hitchhike all over the place. You do not hitchhike in the US unless you want to end up in a ditch somewhere. Hell no. I would never hitchhike. There's no way. There's too many creeps. So people were not nice like they were back in the 90s and you could just hitchhike anywhere. No way, Jose. Maybe if I was a guy like Timma, and that is very sexist to say, but that's like the thing. Like, I know friends that go backpacking and hiking. They're dudes. And I'm like, you all don't have to worry. But I would have to worry. So, and that's, sadly the way that society is, at least over here. But I just feel like the 90s were a different time, because you see all the time in movies where people are hitchhiking, right? They didn't have GPS, or they didn't have it on their phones, or if you did, you were very wealthy, and Timma doesn't have that luxury. And so Dieter says, isn't that great? They stopped for us. He's like, yeah. So there's this constant thing of people doing kind acts towards one another and being good people and realizing that everyone in this episode is a good person, right? And the dad realizing that his son committing a crime may not mean that he's not a good person, which adds a whole nother layer to this whole series. A whole other layer that we're going to talk about when we get to it. But yeah, Timma's being really happy about these people stopping and helping him. And they're going on their way to FRIEHAM. FRIEHAM, I don't know why you would go to FRIEHAM. I don't know if he's following a lead about Johan or what's the deal. Why is he going to FRIEHAM? We've not seen that city mentioned yet in the show. So there must be some reason, though. It's like the show wants me to go ahead and watch episode 21. I'm like, dang it. But yeah. And so they let him in. And then Sherlock of the Year, where Mr. Jones is like, well, you're Asian, he's German. You can't be father and son. And Tim is like, how presumptuous of you. Also, you're correct. Yeah. And so he says he's a good friend's kid. Yeah. Because It is a little odd. It is. If you saw a man with a kid that clearly did not seem like it was their child, and there's a language barrier there too, right? Timma knows English though, so that's good. Dieter does not, seemingly, but Timma knows English. But yeah, it would seem suspicious, especially from Mr. Jones's point of view, because he was a cop, so this would be a scenario that would be probably ticking off red flags to him. And the wife saying he has some weird habits kind of reminds me of Lunge. And the weird habits that he has, while he's on the force there. So, I'll throw Huckleberry this toy. But yeah, the moment he says that he's police, Timma gets a little bit freaked out, like, oh, and Dieter being like, hey, well, let's get off here, let's get out of here. And that's kind of the back and forth of this whole episode, is the idea of, do we trust each other or do we cut and run? And Dieter in this moment's like, let's get out, and Timma is like, no, we're gonna stay, it's fine. And when they get to the police station, Timma is considering running, but they're like in the midst of all these cops. It's not going to be a good scenario. So he decides to trust the Joneses and stay. And so the woman, Mrs. Jones, says when he was working, we couldn't even think of a trip like this. And it should have been clear at this point in the episode that they weren't just on a holiday, because Mr. Jones clearly looks like he has something on his mind, that he's thinking about something, but he doesn't want to talk about it. So it's clearly not just like a Roman holiday, right? They're not just off off on vacation. But she's packed all the cookies and gives Timma and Dieter some. It's really cute. And she clearly wants to be kind. And the thing of it is, they both seem like kind people. So I'm sure that part of their reasoning for going on this trip to see their son is being like, why did our son kill someone? Does that make us bad people for raising him? What can we say about that? What does that say about us? Can we trust other people knowing that? And my thing is, they ran out of gas. And at first, I was like, how would you run out of gas? But then these two older people have no clue about the map. They have no clue about geography. They don't have a GPS in their car to tell them how far it is to get to somewhere. They're just relying on a map. You know what? Back in the 90s, I was born in the late 80s. So, right, I'm on the cusp of the techno generation. I remember when people still used atlases to go from place to place. And it's so bizarre now to think about it. And I'm sure that everyone with a phone is like, well, you just plug in your directions and go. No, when I was a little kid, you had a map and you just followed the map and you just went that direction and you found exits and stuff and you just explored, and that was the thing. And it's like, now you can't even fathom that, right? Without knowing exactly where you're going. So the idea that they drove and then realized as they were running out of gas, there was no gas stations around is a problem. And that is kind of dangerous, no gas station at all. What do you do? And so naturally they decide to hitchhike. I like Dieter is a master hitchhiker. He's like, let's go. he's out in the middle of the road being like, slow down. And I will say, this man that stops for them with the lifestyle trucker hat, the trucker hat that just says lifestyle on it, I want that. I want that trucker hat. I never wear hats, but I would take that. And so the thing about it is that Timma offers, he looks back at the Joneses when the guy with the truck stops, and he kind of looks at the officer, he looks at the truck driver and looks at the Joneses and is like, you guys could go. And they're like, no, you guys go ahead. And Timma's like, well, we'll go find some gas and bring it back and help you all out. And from here on, the moment that things get dark, right? We see Timma looking wistfully out the window, looking absolutely gorgeous. He is just such a well-drawn character in this show. I may have a little bit of a crush on Timma. Just a wee bit. I know a lot of people crush on Johan because he is beautiful, but there's just something about Timma that I'm like, and usually I'm into blonde hair and blue eyes, but there's just something about Timma. He's very handsome in this episode. And when he looks down and sees Dieter eating the cookie, he just kind of smiles, and there's this really sweet, tender moment where Tim is just kind of like, man, Dieter, you're just enjoying this simple little moment. Dieter has no clue. I mean, he knows that Timma is going after Johan to kill him. He does. But Timma's mind is constantly obsessed and bogged down with Johan and trying to find him. And in this moment, him looking at Dieter, he realizes Dieter has none of those concerns. To Dieter, the most he's concerned with is this delicious cookie that he has. And he's not even thinking about Johan. And Timma kind of seems to forget about it for a moment too, which is really nice. And so he asks the man, I love that. Just that's so freaking cute. Dieter just looking up at him. And so then he asks the man where the next gas station is, and the guy's like, not for a long time. So them stopping. I thought at this point, when the sky started to get dark and the birds were cawing overhead over the Joneses, I started to panic a little bit and get like, okay, well, bad things are going to happen. It's dark and monster, so bad things are going to happen. And I started to question what would go on in the episode from here on in. And one of the scenarios was, I thought, okay, Timma and them aren't going to be able to get them gas. I'm like, are the Joneses going to hitchhike themselves? I was like, would they do that? That's their car. I don't think they'd leave it. So then what? Or I thought, honestly, I had all these scenarios in my head. I was like, Johan's going to pick. For some reason, at the start of this episode, I thought that these people were like another foster family to Johan. Because every time we see old people in this show now, I'm like, are you a Johan foster parent? I feel like the meme with the male character and the butterfly comes down. And it's just like, are you this? And I feel like it's like, here's me. And it's the butterfly is old people. And I'm like, are you Johan's adopted family? That's where I thought it was going. Or I thought it was going to cut to like they try to get a hitchhiker and the hitchhiker kills them, or that Johan was going to pop up in the middle of the road for some reason. This show has convinced me that bad things are going to happen. So when this episode happens and nothing bad occurs, I'm like, Monster, what we doing? You're lulling me into this false sense of security. I don't know how I feel about it, right? And so she questions like it must be taking them a while to get gas, and surely he would send somebody to go get it. And the Mr. Jones says, no, he may have just left us. And she's like, no, he was a nice person. And he says, I'm not so sure about that. So at this point, the idea that Mr. Jones thought he was once able to look at someone and tell whether they were a criminal or not, to tell whether they were good or bad, and now he's not sure at all. Now he doubts himself so much. It makes much more sense at this point in the episode because he can't tell if Timma's a good person or a bad person. He can't decide, right? He can't decide. And so he's kind of conflicted how to feel about Timma. And she says, she talks about the sky in this scene to like distract him. She's like, she tries to change the subject. And so she talks about the sky being beautiful. And he's like, I've seen sky many a times. It doesn't matter. He's like, quit just babbling. And she says, the color of the sky after the sun has set. I wonder if Roger is also watching this sky. At that point, I thought he was dead. I thought it was like a metaphorical thing. Like, I wonder if he's watching from heaven sort of deal. But no, she's referring to, is he watching from prison? Is he seeing the same sky that they are? And that's also kind of like a metaphor of, is he seeing the world the same way that we do? Is he viewing it the same way that we do? And if he is, what do we do with that, right? Because he's obviously committed this crime that we have not. But if we live under the same earth and under the same sky, what does that information do for us, right? How does that make us change our perceptions? And then she sees Tinma and them coming over. And Dieter has the lamp, and then he has the gas. And it gets him started back up. And so they go to the nice restaurant, right? They go to the nice restaurant. They park their car, and they go in the hotel. It's something Ban, and it's like E's Cafe, and they have like all of the food stuff. And then shows Dieter, they have the wine, and then it shows Dieter eating the soup and everything, and he has like the orange juice, and it shows them eating dessert. So when they were talking about the wine, I was like, but they're drinking coffee. So I was paying more attention to the meat on their plates than what they were drinking in that wide shot. So when we cut to them, time has passed, and Dieter's eating the dessert. I was like, but that's coffee in front of them. Where's the wine? The wine had already come and gone. That, again, show don't tell. And he's like, it's delicious. And so and they translated the menu. And at this point, the dad is looking at the newspaper, and he doesn't notice Tinma at this point, but he's perceptive. And so the moment he had that paper out, I was like, oh God, he's going to be able to tell that Tinma's wanted. He may not be able to read German, but he's going to see his paper like wanted in the newspaper and know what it means. And it kind of does that. He does this red herring where he says he's a criminal, right? And he puts the paper down, and says, "Don't you think so? I'm talking about the man I just read about that killed his wife." So he can read some German, a little bit, right? Freisprüch vom Mord in Hefro. So I don't know if that guy will have any bearing in later episodes, but he's like, "What do you think?" And Tim is like, "Oh, I don't know." And he kind of looks over to Dieter like, "Let's not talk about murdering people in front of the child, sir." And the wife seems to agree. He says, "When I was a police officer, I had my fair share of accomplishments." He's like, "I was good at my job." And the wife's like, "Oh, stop it. You don't have to say anything." She's like, "Stop it already." He's like, "Don't tell your old stories here." And he says, "When I looked at someone, I could always figure out if he was a criminal and whether or not he was a bad person." And Tim is like, "I see. Where are we going with this?" Like, right? I was fully expecting him to say, "You're a bad person" or "You're a criminal." Like, I was waiting for him to say it. But that's not what we get at all. That's not where it goes. And she's like, "Do you think you had too much wine?" And he goes, "The longer I did it, the worse I became at it." So that part's interesting. The longer I tried to seek out criminals and stuff, the worse I became. So I'm sure everybody's going to comment down below about it, but there's a lot of ways you can take that, as in if his job was to confirm that people were bad people, eventually you probably would get wrong at it, because you probably would be so tainted by that viewpoint that you'd start to see lots of people as bad even if they weren't, right? Or it would warp your perception of if you view people all as bad, then that's going to warp your perception and it will make it harder for you to see people that are good, right? If you believe that everyone in the world is bad, then it's going to be harder to discern who the good people are, right? It's kind of the Death Note mentality. If you've not watched Death Note, this isn't too much of a spoiler, but right from the beginning, in the first couple episodes, there is a character that tells our protagonist, saying that if you believe that it's your job to sniff out evil and condemn those that are evil, eventually you'll be the only one that's not evil, because you'll start to find little things in everyone that points to them being a villain. And that's kind of what happens here, right? So that's fascinating. He was basically suggesting that his work was making him view everyone negatively, and it became harder for him to see who was good and who wasn't, right? The worse I became. He tells Tenma, as Tenma's staring him down, he's like, "Good people and bad people, the guilty and the innocent. I don't have any sense for it anymore." And now that we know that about his son, it makes sense too, because he probably thought his son was a good person. He's like, "My son was a good person. So the fact that he's a murderer, what am I going to do with that? Was I wrong this whole time? Was I misjudging him the entire time?" And they say killed someone. They don't say the circumstances. They don't say what happened. We don't know if it was self-defense, if it was a brawl, if it was a drunken fight. We know no context. We just know he killed someone. And the funny thing about that is this whole thing that we've been worried about with Tenma up until this point is that Tenma says he's going to kill this one person. And it's been like every character we've met has been trying to talk Tenma out of that, as if once he kills, the main thesis has been once Tenma kills Johan, if he does, then he's going to basically become a serial killer. He's going to be a bad person and start killing everyone. But that's not the case, right? And this is the first time in the series that kind of the opposite view has been put out there. Like before, everyone has told Tenma, "Oh, don't kill Johan," or "Don't do this." Or between Hugo and Lunge, there's this idea that once Tenma kills, it'll be like tasting blood and then he can't get enough of it. But the Joneses kind of don't have that perspective about their son. They're like, "Yeah, our son killed someone, but he's not a bad person. And that doesn't mean he's going to kill again." It's not a good thing to kill someone at all. You've taken a life, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to become a serial killer just because you've done it once. Because we don't know the circumstances, we don't know the situation. So it's almost like the mangaka is saying that if Tenma kills Johan, he may not, turn into this crazed maniac. He may, have a myriad of emotions and go through a lot of things. But at the end of the day, I feel like the mangaka is saying that if Tenma has to kill Johan, is that going to make him a bad person? Maybe not. I feel like this episode is trying to say that Timma may not be a bad person in the end, even if he has to kill Johan. I feel like that's kind of the first time we've had that opinion put out there, so it's interesting. It's kind of the first time we had that opinion like brought out into the open in the story, so I'm glad that it decides now to. I'm worried though, because last episode was setting up Johan as a monster and all these things, and this episode is saying, well, if Timma kills him, maybe he's not a bad person. And I'm like, I feel like it's just setting up. This episode is just setting up for things to come and themes for us to think about, right? And so Mr. Jones says, I wasn't that great of a police officer. I wasn't really good at my job. And so he's like, and it almost seems like when they're so sad there and Dieter's just like, I'm like Dieter with the ice cream. I'm like, okay, this got awkward real quick. I feel like the Joneses are saying that he's saying I wasn't a great police officer. If I had been, I might have been able to see the red flags from my kid before he killed someone. Maybe, just maybe. But we're not sure. So, I just love Dieter. Dieter's a mood in this episode. Dieter's just sitting there like, I would be Dieter so hard. I'd be like, give me all the cookies, all the ice cream. Let's do this. And so, yeah, then they travel, they go and they see the kids playing, and the woman says everybody is happy during their childhood. And I'm like, well, not everybody. But that's a good thought. That's a good mentality to have. But it's almost like she's saying, our kid was happy, and when he was a kid, we couldn't have seen this coming. Those were simpler times, right? Before all of this went down, right? And so then they take the pit stop, the detour, to the police station. And so this scene was such a red herring. I was like, are you kidding? Because they go into the police station, and I'm like, I didn't think they were going to turn them in, but part of me was like, are they? Does Mr. Jones not trust Tinma? Are they going to turn him in? But the real thing is, and then I'm like, maybe they're going to go see their son. Maybe he's in custody there. He's already in the prison. So they were just going to the police station to like talk to him or find out where he was. Right? They were just going there to speak to the police and I guess figure out where he was at, right? And then God, the police officer looking and seeing Timma and walking on and just being like, oh, there's a foreigner in a car. Oh my God. That was just, I was like, they have nowhere to go. Dieter's there. It could have gone like so wrong. But it didn't. And Timma, you can tell that you can tell he's so tense. Like Timma's like, what do I do? Do I trust these two or do I run? And if I run, what do I do? Because we don't know where to go. We're not in FRIEHAM. We're in this other place. But he trusts them. He chooses to trust them in the end. And again, it's like, if you're game enough, you can place your trust in me. Oh my God. So yeah. So then they end up going to this castle. And what is the castle called? Steinbach Castle. I made some plans there. They just wanted to go see it. And Tim was like, Steinbach? He's like, there's something I want to see there. This scene was actually really good, but I was nervous as hell throughout this entire scene. Because in my brain, I was going, I was like, is Johan going to be at the castle? Because he's been at every castle since this series. I was like, is Johan going to be there? Did they tell the police to meet them there? Are they going to surround them and try to capture them there? Because so far this series has given you like the sense of you can't trust anyone and you can't believe anyone and you're constantly being tailed by the police or being hounded. And this is like the first episode in a long time with Timma where it's like, you just can breathe and like let the weight off your shoulders and realize that no, not everyone is out to get him. And this family actually learned from Timma and reaffirmed something for themselves. And so yeah, they go up to the top of the castle because they say that Robert mentioned wanting to show us something. And he asks if he lives there, and she says, we're on our way to see him, but we keep making stops. And then they get to the top of the castle and then looking over the edge at the breeze and everything. And Dieter's like, oh, how cool. And they get to the top to see it. And so the thing about this, he was admiring this scenery. And that's the thing. I feel like in that moment, looking across that ground, I feel like that's the affirmation for the parents that our kid, even though he killed someone, he can't be bad because he took the time to appreciate the beauty of the world. And that's kind of the thing, right? With Johann has struck us as the audience as someone that just wants to watch the world burn. He doesn't care about the beauty of the world. He wants to see it drown in fear and despair. And that's kind of what's made him the monster, right? That's what separated him from everybody else. And it's kind of like what Jurgens was trying to get at the last episode. He's like, no. I'm a killer. He's a monster. Like that's the thing. That's the difference. And here it's kind of affirmed because their son Robert, even though he killed someone, he took the time to come here and appreciate the scenery and tell them about it, being like, you need to see the scenery, this beauty of the world here. Someone like Johann, I don't think would do something like this. He wouldn't appreciate this like Robert had. And so it's almost like an affirmation to the parents that our son can't be bad because he can see the beauty in the world and admires it and wants to share it with us. So even though circumstance led this to happen, he's not a bad person, right? Though it makes Johann look even more like a monster. And they said, we came here to see him face to face. And so he thanks Timma and tells him to take care, leaves him and Dieter. And they say he was a nice man. And then Mr. Jones reveals that he saw Timma's name in the police station and that he's being pursued as a murder suspect. But he, like Rudy, believed that he's innocent. So it's like, we're slowly amassing all these people who believe in Timma's innocence. I'm like, he had an army help him at the hospital. Maybe later on, if he gets convicted, they'll all show up at the police station and be like, no, we believe Timma's innocent. And like plead the case for him. Maybe, right? Maybe that'll happen. I don't know. But yeah, so I love that. I love that he believes, because I was afraid at the end of this episode that Mr. Jones would think that he wasn't innocent. But he believes that he is. He's like, before I saw his picture, I doubted him. He cannot be a bad person. And that just seems like and so that's kind of the thing that affirms for Mr. Jones about his son. He's like, well, this guy Timma, he's wanted for murder. Maybe he did murder someone, but he's not a bad person. He's nice and kind. And so maybe that gives him hope for his son, being like, I know my son did this horrible thing, but I don't think that's made him irredeemable and unforgivable and a bad person. Right? And that's cool. Like part of my degree in my education is being like a mediator. Like I went to school and got some certification to be like a mediator. And one of the things that we did in simulation, I've talked about this with Run with the Wind, but we would do like mediation circles. And it's kind of like being not a therapist at all, but you're like a moderator. You are in between two parties, making sure that things stay neutral and things stay to where people can communicate with one another and not get heated and let emotions overtake the conversation. And there was a simulation we watched where a moderator, they were mediating between a man that had been charged for murder and the mother of the person that this guy killed. And it's a very tense simulation because the mother is so furious and angry at this man. And this man's like, I know I did this. And they have a conversation and the mediator kind of, moderates it. And by the end of it, the mother doesn't forgive the man because she's like, I lost my son. I can't get him back. But she does acknowledge by the end of it, she's like, I understand you as a person. And I realize that you're not a evil person, but you just committed a very heinous, unforgivable act, at least for me. And it was a very human simulation. It was very real. I loved it. It's like the kind of stuff that I really like getting involved with. And you can just see that Mr. Jones is like, yeah, Timma's not a bad person, but maybe that gives us hope that our son's not a bad person either. And despite him doing this, that doesn't mean that we did wrong parenting him. It's just we don't know. And we don't know the circumstance of the murder. We don't. Now, having said that, there is a difference, I feel, between what Tenma is doing, and I feel like the mangaka had this episode set up. What Tenma is doing is to take a life is, you could say it's unforgivable. Tenma believes that this is the only way to stop someone from taking other lives, And so he's taking the value of the whole versus the value of the individual, right? Now, obviously there are exceptions where you may believe that, oh, someone that's a mass murderer, they're not forgivable. And again, it's almost on an individual basis. And I feel like this episode's trying to say that this is all on an individual basis. Some people are not bad people, but they get caught in circumstances that has an unfortunate end. In the case of Robert, and then in the case of where we're headed with Tenma, where Tenma supposedly is going to kill Johan. We'll see, right? We'll see where that leads us. But they're like, our son Robert killed someone. He's like, when I thought about that, I quit the force, but I wanted to confirm something with my own eyes. Robert committed a crime, but he's not a bad person. And I love that he takes her hand and he's like, let's go see her. That's so sweet. Them standing in front of the penitentiary to go see him. So sweet. Yeah, I thought a million things. Like when they turned the corner of the police office, I thought it was going to be like Kinderheim. I thought it was going to be like, I had all these theories of how it was going to go south real quick. But no, instead it's this really sweet episode about, accepting that people can be involved in things that are not good, but still be good people at the end of the day, right? There are obvious exceptions, obviously, but I feel like this episode was to try to give us, the audience, context for we'll be able to still follow Tenma after this, even if he kills Johan. I guess is what the mangaka is saying. Like, even if he kills Johan, he's not a bad person. Okay. We'll see, right? I don't know, y'all, but I am very, very excited to watch the next episode already. I'm getting like a bug in me that's like wanting to binge, and I'm like, oh, I gotta be careful. So luckily I have lots of other shows to watch, as you guys probably know from this channel. I have lots of other shows to watch, so that keeps me keeping track with all the shows that I watch and all the manga that I'm reading. That helps keep me from binging too much and getting too far ahead, so I can keep track of everything. So, but I couldn't wait to watch this episode, and it was a good one. So, I am very curious to know your thoughts down below, what you all thought of this episode. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'm back very soon with episode 21 of Monster. Bye.